Bible teaches, and Christianity teaches, and Christians believe, many doctrines that do not sit well with natural man. Fallen human beings have a tough time with some of the doctrines that the Bible teaches, and with some of the things that we claim to believe as Christians. Of course, we should expect, since there is a sovereign God, and this sovereign God is transcendent and completely different than us, then we should expect that He would think differently than we do. Right? Which means you should encounter things that do not sit well with your human flesh. If you didn't, I think then you should worry. Like if all of a sudden you read Scripture and everything, you just go, well, that just sits well with me and that's exactly how I would do it. Probably missing something. One of these doctrines that skeptics have a tough time with is the doctrine of hell. Eternal punishment. Skeptics and unbelievers cannot simply fathom how a loving God would judge anyone, much less send them to a place like hell. They see it as one of Christianity's most offensive doctrines. They see this teaching, again, as becoming something that can lead to exclusion, abuse, division, and violence. They suggest that any Christian who thinks that there are people who are bound for hell, then that Christian must perceive such people as unequal, not having the same dignity and worth as people who will be in heaven forever. So what I want to do tonight is I want us to take a look at this objection. A loving God would not send people to hell. And I want us to do what Paul says. I want us to tear down this argument as being against the reasonable and logical God that we serve. First, a God of judgment simply can't exist. Some people just simply have a problem with that, don't they? A God of judgment simply cannot exist. I find it very interesting that every generation is very arrogant because they look at previous generations and think they're stupid. Yeah. Right? Every generation looks at the previous generation and thinks, they didn't know anything. It's a very arrogant approach that each generation takes. And I find it funny because people are now saying this with millennials. And it's certainly true with millennials. But guess what? It was true with Gen X, which is my generation. And it was true with the generation before that. And whatever generation you were in, your generation thought you were better than your previous generation too. Thought you were smarter, thought there was more technological advances, so things were so much better for you, and we're smarter than the people came before us. And then each culture can get very prideful. In other words, developed cultures think they're way smarter than undeveloped cultures. And so there is this arrogance that kind of surrounds us. For instance, in ancient times, it was simply understood that there was a transcendent moral order. Okay? If you look back kind of previous to the 20th century, right? So 19th century and beyond, almost every society, it was taken for granted that there was a transcendent moral order that we all should follow. There were right and wrong. They were true for everybody, and we should follow them and order our lives according to these specific things. There was something outside of ourselves that we considered to be in charge. Even if it's a false god, all right? There was still something outside of human beings that should be followed. It was understood that if you violated whatever moral order was there, if you violated it, then you would be responsible for violating it. Okay? So even if you believed in a false god that did not exist, there were rules. Rules outside of yourself that if you didn't follow, you're going to be in trouble for not following them. There would be consequences for not following them. So the path to living life was to order your life around the moral order that came from outside of you. Right? So here's my life. There is a truth or a moral order. There's a way to conduct yourself that is outside of just how I feel about it. My job then as a human being is to order my life and align my life with that reality. Which brought about certain ways to behave. Today we have reversed this. Today, naturalism rules. So instead of having a very spiritual mind about everything, we have a naturalistic mind about everything. Science and nature is the be-all, end-all. And instead of taking our desires and matching them up with reality, we take reality and match them up with our desires. You see the flip that happened? In our culture, one of the craziest things that's going on right now is however you identify, that's who you are. Look, we've done the very thing. We've said, okay, reality doesn't exist. How I feel about reality is reality. So if I was born a white woman, if I determine that I am a black man internally, then that's what I am. And you ought to respect that. But that's where our culture is and is heading. It's interesting to me. I mean, we know about the transgender movement, but there is a lady who, her name is Rachel. I can't remember her last name. I'm mad at myself right now. She was born a white middle-class girl. And somewhere along the way, she began to identify with the black community and basically for years fooled people into thinking she was black. And then it came out that she wasn't black at all, and she says that doesn't change anything. I self-identify as an African American. But look what's happened. Instead of saying there is a reality, and I'm going to take my life to match that reality, what we've done is we've said, no, we're going to take our desires and we're going to create the reality. And those poor folks back there, I mean, they just didn't get it. I mean, how in the world could men really think that they were just men? And women think that they were women? And how I mean, they're just so narrow-minded and so messed up. So what happens is the modern person believes that they have the ability to determine right and wrong. Right? If there's no moral reality, no moral order that is reality, then I determine, if I can determine whether or not I'm a man or a woman, I can certainly determine right and wrong. And that's exactly what happens. We determine if our actions are right or not, if we see them as right or not. You could see how this would lead to an unbelief in God, especially a God who would judge us. I mean, if I'm determining what is right and wrong for my life, how can there be a transcendent God that judges me based upon right and wrong? Well, there can't be. There can't be. I'm determining this for myself. And we say it all the time. That's simply making ourselves out to be God. The arrogance lies in developed countries and undeveloped countries. As I said, for instance, skeptics in our culture think that a God of judgment can't be real. But do you know that other cultures have the very opposite problem? Let me give you an example, right? In our culture, we live in a very squishy culture, right? A very squishy culture. What I mean by that is that we are super duper lovey-dovey, right? Without even defining what love is. We're super duper lovey-dovey and everything offends everybody. Everything offends everybody. Like, where did we get to the place where everything offends us? And if you don't believe it, just go to Facebook. Everything is offensive. And I'm just like, can y'all just shut up? Quit being such babies. So what that this person said this about what you are? Who cares? What does that do to you? Nothing. Just don't click on the link and read it. Just move on.
I'm getting offended by other people being offended.
Yeah, then we get offended by other people being offended. Rachel, yes, Dozel, that's her name. But think about this. So that's our society. So Skeptics in our society, when they look at Christianity, because that's our culture, they immediately say, ooh, I have a real big problem with a God who judges. But if you go to another culture that's not as squishy as ours, do you know what they have a problem with? They have a problem with the teachings of Jesus that say, turn the other cheek. Love your enemies. They see that as offensive. Because they're like, whoa, 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 my enemy has wronged me. Justice must be done. And so for you to tell me to turn the other cheek is a violation of how things ought to be. So it's interesting that our culture says, well, the problem is a God of judgment. Other cultures look at Christianity and say, the problem is there's too much love and forgiveness in Christianity. And so what I want to say to the people in our culture is, why is your objection to Christianity better than the other countries or other cultures' objection to Christianity? Right? You both have objections, and you're on polar opposite extremes of why you're objecting. So how do you determine which objection is better? Again, the only thing you would be able to say is arrogance. Our culture is just better than their culture. It's very exclusive if someone would say that, right?
I'm offended.
I'm offended that they say that. Again, if Christianity has a God that is sovereign over all things, that is transcendent, and we are made in His image, but He thinks radically different than we do, then we should expect to find contradictions in every culture. Every culture should look at Christianity and say, there are things in Christianity that doesn't fit well with me. Of course. Because God is the God of Christianity. And of course He's not going to think like you. Of course there's going to be things that you look at and you object to. So the argument that a God of judgment simply cannot exist is simply a silly statement. And not only that, it's a very prideful statement. Here's another thing they say. Skeptics simply cannot get around the fact that Christianity teaches that God is a God of love, yet at the same time a God of judgment. And they say that a God of judgment cannot be a God of love. They say those two things cannot go together. You cannot have a God of love and a God of judgment. They cannot go together. Now, it's important to first point out that all loving persons sometimes are filled with wrath. Is that not true? Mm-hmm. In fact, if you say you are a loving person and nothing riles up your anger and wrath, I would argue you do not love properly. For instance, listen, I'm a lover, not a fighter. Okay? Look at me. If me and Kevin Hatfield are in a dark alley, you don't want me fighting with you. You'd rather have to take Kevin. Okay? It's just the way it is. However,
Or Laura.
both of them. Either one of them. Very true. However, if you come after my wife, it is going to be on.
You would try.
There, and I will fight. I already said this. I will be the dirtiest fighter. The dirtiest. There is no. All the rules are gone. There's no gentleman fighting here. I'm biting. I'm clawing. I'm grabbing. I'm poking. It don't matter.
I see screaming.
Oh, it's gonna be crazy. But that would rile up my anger and wrath, would it not?
Sure.
And the reason why is because I love her. If you come after my children, you're going, whatever wrath I have, whatever anger I have, it's going to be riled up because I love them. So my wrath, my anger, my coming at you is coming from a place of love. They're not opposed to one another. Because I love, wrath comes out. Because I love, sometimes anger comes out at those who are attacking those that I love. And so we need to understand that if someone is ruining someone that I love, Even if someone is ruining themselves and I love them, it makes me angry. Right?
Yes.
If our kids are ruining themselves, in our love, we get mad at our kids. Even though we love them. We're mad at them coming from a place of love. So we need to understand, God's wrath is not some cranky explosion that happens because God is his disposition is so frail that if you do something wrong, God just has to explode out in anger and come and get you. I love the examples that Jesus gives us of this. You remember when Jesus goes into the temple, right? And causes chaos. Can you imagine being there that day? And the Bible says as Jesus was walking by the temple and he saw the money changers ripping people off, it says that he became angry. But what didn't happen is Jesus didn't get angry and go running into the temple, flipping over tables. He sat down and he made a whip. This wasn't an out-of-control anger. This was a very precise, pinpointed anger. And why was he angry? Right? Because the holiness of God had been tread upon. He loves himself and you've just treaded upon the holiness of God. And he loves those people that are being taken advantage of. And so his anger and his wrath comes out. Not an explosion out of control, but a very pinpointed reason. People were being ruined. The character of God was being exploited. The Bible clearly teaches that God's wrath flows from his love and his delight in creation. He is angry because evil and injustice is at war with peace and integrity. Turn with me to Psalm 145. I'm going to read verses 17 through 20. Now, I'm giving you this verse because I want you to see how the wrath and judgment comes from the love. Psalm 145, Psalm 145.
Just want to tell you.
Everyone turn to Psalm 145. Somebody go make me a pizza pie. Verse 17 through 20. The Lord is righteous in all his ways and kind in all his works. All right, there we go. Righteous in all his ways and kind in all his works. The Lord is near to those who call on him, to all who call on him in truth. He fulfills the desires of those who fear him. He also hears their cry and saves them. The Lord preserves all who love him, but all the wicked he will destroy. Why will he destroy the wicked? Out of his love for his people. He destroys the wicked out of his love for those who call out to him and who fear him and who draw near to him. Again, not an explosion of hatred and anger. Okay? God doesn't get angry like we get angry. We get angry because we lose control a lot, right? That's not how God gets angry. God gets angry for a very specific reason. It is very controlled and it is very pinpoint. I love my people. You are pouring out violence against my people. You are trying to ruin my people. And so you will get my anger and you will get my wrath because I love them. Skeptics tend to also say that if you believe in a God who smites evildoers, then that's going to make it okay for you to smite evildoers. Okay, I've heard these arguments. My goodness, if you have a God who goes after evildoers, who if you're a Christian and these people aren't Christians and they're coming at you, then it's going to make it okay for you to go and attack the evildoers. But in Christianity, the very opposite is true, isn't it? Now let me say this. If God were not an angry God who pours out his wrath and judgment, If God were not angry at injustice, if God were not angry at deception, if He did not make a final end to violence, then the only means of prohibiting evil would be for me to do it. Did you catch that? If there isn't a God who will take care of it all, then I'm going to start thinking, I got to take care of it all. Right? If there is not a God who will bring an end to all violence and injustice, then it falls upon my shoulders to bring an end to all violence and injustice. And therefore, instead of leaving vengeance up to God, vengeance would be in my hands because God won't take care of it. But see, in Christianity, we have a God who will take care of it, right? Everything that has been done wrong, that is an injustice or violence or anything, any sin that has been perpetrated against another will be dealt with. All wrongs will be made right. All injustices will be fixed. And because that is the case, I don't have to do it. Vengeance is the Lord's. Amen. God will take care of it. It's not my responsibility to take care of it. I don't go repay evil for evil. I can repay good for evil, knowing God will take care of the evil. God will take care of what has been done. This will only happen if I am sure that there's a God who will right all wrongs, settle all accounts perfectly. That's the only thing that gives me the power to restrain myself. I want you to think about it. Over 60 million human beings have been murdered legally in this country. 60 million. And it is legal. If I do not believe there was a God who's going to make that right, I would lose my mind and I would go on a killing spree. Because logic would say, well, we'll just go kill all the doctors. We'll just go kill all the nurses. We'll just stop this. Physically stop this. That would be our only recourse, right? It would drive us mad and insane. But because we believe in a God who He will settle that. And He will settle that perfectly. He will deal with these 60 million people who have been slaughtered. He will deal with it. My job is to go preach the gospel. My job is to go love those women and love the doctors and love the nurses by telling the truth. Not to take the violence into my own hands and stop it. See, in Christianity, it's the very opposite of what the skeptics think will happen. The very opposite. I can restrain myself because Jesus is coming back. I can restrain myself because Jesus is coming back. So this idea that a God of judgment can't be a God of love, again, doesn't hold up, does it? It doesn't hold up. Every person who loves makes a judgment, gets angry, and pours out some wrath. Now the one we probably spend the most time on, a loving God would not allow hell. Skeptics say, okay, fighting evil and injustice in this world by making judgments and pouring out anger and wrath is one thing. Okay, it's one thing if God does that in the here and now. But sending people to hell for all of eternity is a completely different matter. It's one thing for God to be angry now and deal with people now, but then to punish those people forever and ever, ever in hell is a radically different thing. Now, here's how most people see hell working. Okay, if you were to ask the average American, how does hell work? Like, what is hell? How does it work? All right? This is kind of how they're going to probably describe it. I'm speaking in very broad terms, but most of them are going to think something like this. God's going to give you a certain amount of time. All right? Your life on the earth, you got a certain amount of time. and you have to make the right choices. And if by the time your life is over, when time is up in your life, if you have not made the right choice, what God considers the right choice, then He is going to take you and send you into hell. And as He throws your soul into hell and you are falling into the blazing inferno that is hell, that those poor souls are going to be crying out for God's mercy. God, we're sorry. Help us, God, we're sorry. And as they fall into hell, the fires of hell, God will say, you had your chance, you had your time, now get what you deserve. That's how most people see hell working. All right? And then they have this literal fire that then burns people up forever and ever and ever. This is a caricature, by the way. This is a misunderstanding of the very nature of hell. The biblical picture of hell is separation, all right, from the loving presence of God. Now, would we all agree, and I want you to think with me here, would we all agree that the closer we walk with God, and the more of His presence we bask in, and the more of His love we soak up, the more joy and delight we have?
Yes.
Right? Pretty obvious statement there. All right? So, would the opposite be true? The less that I bask in the glory of God, in the presence of our loving God, the less that I bask in that glorious grace, the less joy I'm going to have. The less delight I'm going to have. The more miserable I will be. We say this all the time, right? Only Christ will satisfy.
That's right.
If you search anywhere else for your satisfaction, you're going to be left empty. All right, well, there's our split right there. If you are basking in the love and the glory and the grace of Jesus, more delight, more joy, more satisfaction, more pleasure. At His right hand are pleasures forevermore. Psalm 16. Then the opposite must be true. So what hell is, if we want to boil down, what is the foundational premise of hell? It is a place where God has removed, not necessarily His presence in general, but where He has removed His loving kindness, He has removed His grace, He has removed His glorious presence from a person's life, leaving them to themselves completely. That is what hell would be. I think Brother James tells a story when Aaron was younger. Aaron asked Brother James once where heaven is. And I think your response was where God is.
Yeah, that's where Jesus is.
Wherever Jesus is, that's heaven. So wherever Jesus isn't, guess what that is? That's hell. Okay? So when Jesus comes back to the new earth, and He is in bodily form on the new earth, where will heaven be? On the new earth. He will not be in hell. He will not be with the unbelieving. It will be hell. There will be no satisfaction. There will be no joy. There will be no pleasure. So that's what I first want us to understand. Human beings, hell is a place where human beings do not thrive. They do not thrive. What is the most common image of hell? I've already referenced it. The most common image of hell is fire, right?
Right. Yeah.
Now, I want to let you know, Brother James and I have talked about this, so I'm sure he won't care if I mention this, but I do not believe in hell is a literal fire. Okay, I believe that's a picture. All right, I believe it's a symbol. Here's why. One of the reasons. Hell is also described as a place of darkness. So you have a place of fire and a place of darkness at the same time. And people say, well, don't you know there's a black flame that burns so hot that you can't, see it? Not only is it a stretch, the pictures that are given in the Bible are to reveal things to people. Right? No one in the Old Testament times or New Testament times knew what a black flame was. Right? Nobody had a clue what a black flame was. That wasn't just something that we, thought about later on, right? If anybody reading the Bible hears hell is a place of fire, and hell's a place of darkness. They're going to know that's a contradiction, right? If they're literal. However, if they're pictures that are getting things across to us, then they make sense. It's not literal fire, but what fire does is what hell will do to us. What darkness does is what hell will do to us. So let's take fire, for instance. What does fire do? It destroys, it disintegrates things. All right, it takes something that's big and large and it tears it down. It disintegrates it. It brings it down. All right? I am arguing that is what hell does to the soul of fallen human beings. It disintegrates who they are. Remember, what we're trying to do is become more and more in the image of Jesus. Right? Our souls as Christians, instead of disintegrating, they are now thriving in Christ. Well, the opposite would be true. We are basking in the light of God's glory. Hell is a place of darkness, where that glory is not. Where the soul is shriveling up. Where not that they become unhuman, but they become less and less human-like. What is it to look perfectly human? What would that look like to look perfectly human? To look just like Jesus. Right? Just like Jesus. So the less you look like Jesus, the less you're acting human. Correct? Well, imagine what hell will be. If to be human is to be like Jesus. So what I'm saying, Christians, is the more and more we're being conformed in the image of Jesus Christ, the more and more human we are acting. Doesn't mean that we're not humans, but it means we're not fulfilling our humanness. All right? That's why eventually the new earth is going to be where humans are perfectly. We're expressing our humanness perfectly. So take the opposite of that. If I'm becoming less and less like Jesus, I'm acting less and less as humans should act. And by the way, do we not see this on the earth now? We have words like, that's inhumane. What do we mean by that? That's not the way a human should act. That is not how human beings thrive. So imagine what hell must be like. Imagine what hell must be like.
Eternal agony.
Agony. This idea that literal fire is like that's the worst part of hell. Right? That there's going to be this fire and it's just this constant physical burning and torture forever. No. Well, let me give you an example. When you're self-centered and self-absorbed, what do you end up being? Miserable. What did Brother James preach this morning? How do we thrive as human beings, and especially as Christians?
Serving with others.
Serving other people, loving other people, worshiping other people. Now take the opposite of that. That's hell. When you are self-absorbed and self-centered, and all you can do is think about yourself, you become miserable. Now imagine that growing for all of eternity inside of you. And the more and more you're in hell, the more and more self-absorbed you become. Hell is one's freely chosen identity apart from God going on for eternity. Let me say that again. Hell is one's freely chosen identity apart from God going on for eternity. Hell is described as a place of weeping and gnashing of teeth. When I was growing up, I heard that and I thought, man, that's pain, right? Oh, I'm burning. Oh, it hurts so bad. Oh, and we're crying because we're in pain and we're gnashing our teeth. But then you read in the Bible what that actually means. It's not pain, it's defiance. You remember when Stephen was stoned? He preaches his message. At the end of his message, what do the religious leaders do? They gnash their teeth at him. Was it because they were in physical pain? No. It's because they were so defiant and angry with what he preached that they were full of rage and hatred toward him, and they gnashed their teeth and they took him out and they killed him. Gnashing of teeth has nothing to do with pain. It has to do with a willful defiance of. Hell is a place of weeping and gnashing of teeth. Why? It is a place of eternal defiance to God. There is no, oh God, have mercy on us in hell. None whatsoever. By the way, how does a person say, I was wrong, I'm a sinner, forgive me, God, and get me out? Only through the power of the Holy Spirit. Only through regeneration can that come about. So the only way that people in hell could ever change their mind is if the Holy Spirit goes to hell and regenerates people. It's the only way. So if he doesn't do that, if he freely lets them have themselves for all of eternity, they will always gnash their teeth at God. Always. You guys know how I feel about C.S. Lewis. Anybody ever read his book, Great Divorce? His fictional story about heaven and hell? In his book, Great Divorce, there are people on a bus on their way to hell. And hell gets described like this. It is not a question of God sending us to hell. In each of us, there is something growing, which will be hell unless it is nipped in the bud. In his book, the people on the bus would rather have their freedom than God's salvation. They would rather have, we will stay on this bus and go to hell as long as we can have our freedom.
Well, that's not freedom.
It's not freedom.
That's right. It's a lie.
But that's what they believe.
Right.
I want my freedom to be my own God and to do my own thing, and I'll go to hell before I accept this salvation, where I'm going to be a slave to Jesus Christ. Lewis writes this. I love this statement. Hell is the greatest monument to human freedom. Hell is the greatest monument to human freedom. Everybody that says, my will be done, okay, you can have it. And on the bus they go, and they'll go right to hell before they give up their human freedom and say, your will be done, O God. In Romans 1:24, okay, in Romans 1:24, what does God do to people who do not honor Him nor give thanks to Him? Even though they can see they can look at creation and they can see the invisible attributes of God in creation. He gives them up. And what does He give them up to? Themselves. He gives them up to themselves. So let me throw this out there, just for you to gnaw and chew on and think about. What I'm going to do is I'm going to parallel heaven and hell. Okay? A person becomes a Christian by the power of the Holy Spirit. Okay? Take my own life, 14 years old, I get saved, Holy Spirit comes to dwell inside of me. Heaven and earth have just met in my life. Right? Now, what happens to me is that I begin to progress. At the age of 14, I began to progress down this road that will go on forever. Right? I'm growing in the Lord. My understanding of God grows. I'm changing more and more into the image of Christ. And this is this ongoing thing where walking with Jesus gets more pleasurable. There's more joy. There's more satisfaction. And it continues and it continues and it continues. And then Jesus comes back and guess what? It doesn't end. Now it's like pumped full of steroids. Now it's really continuing. And now I am experiencing the trajectory that my life has been on since I was 14 years old. I'm just continuing the same trajectory. And what I would argue is that we as Christians, we manifest heaven on earth when we live out who we are in Christ. We are manifesting heaven on earth when we actually live it out. We say before, this is some new creation stuff going on here. Our service we had this morning, that's some new creation stuff.
Yeah.
We were experiencing a taste of heaven on earth because of what Christ has done, because He brought the two together. Then He comes back, and that trajectory gets, it's like Star Wars and Star Trek and stuff when they go into warp speed, right? Like they get, and then boom, now they're really. Well, that's what's going to be like when Christ comes back. But now so we always say, man, that's a little piece of heaven on earth right there. That's how I feel about some desserts, by the way. Now take hell. All right? A person becomes more and more self-absorbed, more and more self-centered, more and more prideful. Everything becomes about them. As Lewis said, there's something in them that is growing. It is not nipped in the bud. It continues to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow. And then they come to the end of their life and they're still in defiance to God, and they're saying to God, no, I want my freedom. And so hell, instead of thinking about where it is and the literal fire and the literal darkness, instead it's the continual trajectory of God giving them over to themselves. It's God still saying, you can take this path. I'm letting you have it. And God giving them over to themselves for all of eternity. Without end. And then I want to end with this. I believe in a God of love. Isn't that what so many people say today? I believe in a God of love. I don't believe in a God of judgment. I don't believe in a God of wrath. I don't believe in a God of anger. I believe in a God of love. If you were to ask most people in America who believe in God, which, by the way, a vast majority of them still say they believe in God, and you were to ask them, describe your God, they're going to describe a God of love.
The devil believes in God too.
He does. And but that's their go-to position is, He is a God of love. Now, I would challenge anyone who says this to find me any religious text outside of the Bible that describes God as this loving, benevolent, giving God who created the universe out of love and dignity and delight and pleasure. Find that in any other religious text. Won't be done. So I would ask this person who says they believe in a God of love, I would say, well, you're not getting that from other religious texts. Now let's just look at the world today. All the mayhem and violence and sin and disaster. And you can't really look at the world from that kind of a position and say, wow, I look at the world today and God must be a God of love. No, just stop all this stuff if you're just love. You can't look at history and say that either. So I would ask the question, where are you getting this idea that God is love? Like you say that God is love, so the question that needs to be asked is, where are you getting that idea from? Just pull it out of the sky? Or did you take it from Christianity? That's what they've done. So the people who say, I just believe that God is just a God of love, they're taking that idea from the Bible because they're not finding it in any other religious text. They certainly aren't pointing to the way the world is right now to say that's my basis for God is love. They're not pointing to history and saying that's my basis for God is love. They're taking from Christianity to say that God is love, and at the same time rejecting what Christianity says about God's judgment. So they're borrowing from Christianity to attack what Christianity teaches. It's absurd. The source of their idea that God is a God of love is from the Bible. So the belief in a pure, loving God who accepts everyone and judges no one is a powerful act of faith. The view of God where He loves everyone and accepts everyone and has no judgments on anyone is a massive leap of faith.